Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Becoming a Sponsor or CRO of Choice, the Site Perspective. My name is Sarah and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank the Avoca group, who developed the content for this presentation. The Avoca Group is a life sciences consulting firm, integrating deep subject matter expertise with industry-leading approaches and technology. The company tailors solutions that help companies build quality management, inspection readiness, and effective oversight systems into new and existing processes. I'd also like to thank the Association of Clinical Research Professionals. In clinical research, people are everything. ACRP raises clinical research standards and accelerates careers. Better people, better results. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. A member of the Avoca Group's Integrated Consulting and Avoca Quality Consortium work streams, Kristen Bennett provides consulting services to top pharmaceutical, biotech, and contract research organizations, and oversees client deliverables, systems, and processes across the Avoca Group. Kristen has 12 years of clinical trial experience with expertise in clinical trial execution, process development, and strategic management. Her previous professional roles include project, data, and site management. Our second speaker for today, Jim Cremidas, is the Executive Director for ACRP, a nonprofit association that represents the clinical research enterprise. Prior to that, he conducted consulting services for a variety of clients, including support for investigator sites, academic institutions, sponsors, and suppliers. He was the Senior Vice President of Patient Recruitment at 2 large CROs for more than 6 years, where he and his team were responsible for developing and implementing patient enrollment strategies for global clinical trials. Prior to that, he spent 24 years with Eli Lilly and Company. So just before I pass control to today's speakers, we have a quick poll question for the audience. This poll is now being launched on all audience member screens. I'd invite everyone to vote on the live poll now. This question is, of the following options, which one best describes your line of work? So perhaps you work for a site, maybe you're a principal investigator, sub-investigator, or director or administrator. Maybe you work for a site, but you're a clinical research coordinator or regulatory coordinator. Or perhaps you work for a CRO, sponsor, or another organization. Again, that question is, of the following options, which one best describes your line of work? I'll leave that open for just another moment here. Let everyone get their vote in. And let's go ahead and close the poll for voting. Take a look at those results. Okay, so almost the majority of our audience, 49% of you today said you work for a sponsor organization. 23% answered a CRO. 9% said you work for a site, you're a clinical research coordinator or regulatory coordinator. 16% said other. And just 2% said you work for a site and you're a principal investigator, sub-investigator, director, or administrator. So let's go ahead and close that poll, and without further ado, I'll pass control of the presentation over to our first speaker. And Jim, you may start whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Can you see my screen?
We can. Looks good.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to just walk you through briefly sort of the background for how the survey came about and the methodology that we used. We wanted to collaborate, both Avoca and ACRP, on a site-focused based research, looking at the things that really drive quality in clinical trials. And as you can see from the graphic here, there are a number of areas that we looked at: study design, how the study is conducted, monitoring we felt was obviously very important, what type of technology systems were in place, obviously data capture and working style. And then the piece in the middle, the NPS, the likelihood to recommend, Kristen's going to talk about that in more detail, but that's a very interesting thing to monitor, because it really kind of shows the likelihood that someone's going to recommend a given organization, and what there's a direct correlation with that, and how someone does, or how an organization does, in terms of their scoring overall throughout the survey. So a little bit of background about ACRP. As Sarah mentioned, we're a not-for-profit organization. Our mission is to promote excellence in clinical research. And our vision is that clinical research is performed ethically, responsibly, and professionally everywhere across the world. Now, we primarily focus on the human element of that. So in other words, we don't do a lot in terms of, developing technology or developing processes or things of that nature. Our focus, unlike some other not-for-profits, is really on how do we get the people who are doing clinical research to perform at their best. We've got about 13,000 members globally. Over half of those work at clinical research sites. So primarily we've got study coordinators, PIs. We also have a large number of site monitors, or CRAs. So interesting, last year, actually 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to participate in an Avoca group conference where there was a lot of great discussion around the work that had been done to improve quality between CROs and sponsors. And the topic came up that said, look, this is great, but if you really want to drive quality throughout the entire clinical research enterprise, we've got to make sure that sites are part of the process as well. So Patty and I spoke. Patty Lupton, the founder and CEO of the Avoca Group, and decided that there was really an opportunity for ACRP to work with Avoca and vice versa, because we could literally go all the way through the continuum and have sponsors, CROs, and sites included in driving quality-based initiatives. So there's a nice quote here from Patty. Investigation sites are key stakeholders in the clinical trial process, yet silos still exist between sponsors, CROs, and sites, and that impacts the quality of clinical trials. So this partnership is really in keeping with ACRP's vision and Avoca's vision to improve industry collaboration in clinical research, and in doing so, make a tangible difference in improving quality and driving efficiency through the clinical trial execution process. That then led to a meeting that we had at the ACRP conference last spring. That was, we called it the ACRP Avoca 2018 Quality Congress. It was a terrific meeting. There were a lot of what I'll call aha moments, where sites began to understand why CROs and sponsors did things the way they did because of certain restraints from around regulatory guidelines or whatever, but things that they just didn't understand from the sponsor and CRO perspective. And vice versa. There were a number of things that sites brought up that the sponsors and CROs just didn't understand were concerns. So we were really happy with the outcome of that meeting, and we're going to do it again in Nashville on Friday, April 12th, at our conference again for 2019. So again, it'll be the ACRP Avoca 2019 Quality Congress this time around. Now, along with that, we administered this survey prior to the meeting, and we presented the findings, or the results, I should say, at the 2018 ACRP conference. And we'll do the same in 2019. Now, the methodology that we use, and these are the results you're going to see today. We used an online survey that we ran between January and March of 2018 among site staff, representing a broad range of roles. There were 151 respondents that evaluated sponsor organizations and 130 that evaluated CROs. They were able to evaluate up to 3 companies with whom they had participated in a clinical trial over the past 12 months. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to actually ask a couple questions here, and then I'll come back and show you a little bit more about the how the study was developed.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jim. As you said, we've got another poll question here from the audience. This question is, if you're from a site organization and you're working with CROs and or sponsors, with regard to your working relationship, are you very satisfied, generally dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied? And I promise if you work with a CRO or sponsor, we've got a question coming up for you in a moment here. So if this applies for you, you say, I am from a site organization, you're working with CROs and or sponsors, how would you grade your working relationship? Are you very satisfied, generally dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied? And I'll just leave that up for a few more moments here, make sure everyone's had a chance to get their vote in on that question. And I think we'll go ahead and close that poll for voting now, and we'll see what the results look like. Okay, so most of you, 88% of the audience today who works for a site organization said they're generally satisfied with their relationship with CROs and sponsor companies. 13% of you, however, said that you're generally dissatisfied, so definitely some room for improvement there. Now we've got our next poll question here that's being launched on everyone's screens. So this one's for you if you're from a CRO or sponsor organization. If you're working with sites, with regard to that working relationship, how would you grade that relationship? Same possible responses here. Are you very satisfied, generally dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied? So this question's for you if you work for a CRO or sponsor organization and you're working with sites. How would you grade your working relationship? Okay, we'll just leave that up for another moment here. Looks like you're getting your last votes in. And let's take a look at those results. Okay, some similar results here. 78% of you who work for a CRO or sponsor organization said you're generally satisfied with your working relationship with sites. 14% said generally dissatisfied. However, 8% of you said you're very satisfied with that relationship. So a bit of a different distribution there. That concludes those polling questions. So I'll pass it back over to you, Jim.
Thanks again, Sarah. Interesting results. Well, I'm going to share with you the characteristics of the respondents when sponsors were being rated. And as you can see, about 59% or close to 60% had done 10 or more trials in the past 12 months. So this indicates that these were sites that do a lot of clinical research. Obviously, these are professional sites. You can see some others in terms of the number of trials. And then if you look over at the role, you'll see these are primarily clinical research coordinators that responded. So about 2/3 were clinical research coordinators. And then from a therapeutic area perspective, you can see cardiovascular, endocrine, respiratory, etc. So this gives you a sense of the sites that were evaluating sponsors. Now, I've got a similar slide that is the characteristics of those rating CROs. And again, very professional sites in terms of 10 or more studies, high percentage. And then again, very high percentage of clinical research coordinators The therapeutic areas are modified slightly, but still you can see oncology jumps up quite a bit in this particular part of the poll. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Kristen Bennett from the Avoca group, and she will walk you through the results.
Thanks, Jim. Just going to share my screen here. So we're going to go through the key findings now from the research that Jim just explained regarding the methodology. And first, before I get into the key findings and the data from this research, I'd like to quickly go over Net Promoter Score and how it's calculated. The question asked was, based on your experience working with the following organizations, how likely is it that you would recommend each to a clinical research colleague? The response scale was broken up from 0 to 10, with 0 being not at all likely and 10 being extremely likely. The responses then received indicate if a respondent is a detractor, passive, or a promoter based on their answer. Detractors are answers from 0 to 6, passives are 7 and 8, and then promoters answered with either 9 or 10 for this specific question. And then you can see that NPS is calculated by the percent of promoters minus the percent of detractors. Then this calculation gives us the quote-unquote score, which is indicative of the satisfaction of the respondent's experience. And then just some quick background about Net Promoter Score. Fred Reichheld first introduced Net Promoter Score in the Harvard Business Review in 2004. After testing the best ways to measure what would be the most predictive of growth, he found that the likelihood to recommend something, so a brand, a company, etc., was found to be the most highly correlated measure reflective of in-market behavior. In addition, NPS has been proven to work across industries and sectors and predicts both growth and brand loyalty. That's why we decided to use this metric. And as a whole, site personnel provided a higher Net Promoter Score for sponsors in this research that we've done, overall rating them more favorably versus CROs. Then the NPS for sponsors was plus 22%, and for CROs, it was minus 34%. This image is a bit hard to see the numbers for the sponsors' detractors, but just by the coloring of the columns alone, you can see that the sponsors had quite a bit more promoters than CROs at 44% versus 19%. And then not only did sponsors have more promoters to rank them more favorably, but the CROs had a lot more detractors as well. And then also just to note, the data represented 398 ratings of CRO companies and 325 ratings of CROs. Then I'll toss it back over to Sarah for another polling question.
Great, yeah, thanks, Kristen. Let's go ahead and launch that poll for everyone. Just as we did with the last two polls, I'd like to poll the members of the audience who work with site organizations to start, and then we'll do the same question for sponsor and CRO organizations. So this question is, if you are with a site organization, how prepared are you for a site inspection? Only 3 possible responses for this one. Maybe you're very prepared, somewhat prepared, or not prepared. And again, that question is, if you are with a site organization, how prepared are you for a site inspection? So I'll give all of our audience members today who are with a site organization a chance to vote on that poll here and reflect on their preparedness for a site inspection. We'll just leave it up for another moment here while you all get your vote in. And I think that's probably just enough time. So let's close that poll for voting and share the results with everyone. So a bit of a split here. 44% of you said you're very prepared for a site inspection. Another 44% said somewhat prepared, and just 11% of you said you're not prepared. So definitely some room for improvement there. Let's go ahead and get into our final poll question for today's webinar. This is the same question, but for our sponsor and CRO audience members. So if you're with a sponsor or CRO, how prepared are your sites for an inspection? Are they very prepared, somewhat prepared, or not prepared? Again, if you're with a sponsor or CRO, how prepared are your sites for an inspection? And I'll just leave that question up for another moment here. Get your vote in if you haven't already. As I said, this is our last poll question for today. Leave that open, and I think most of you have gotten your vote in, so let's take a look at those final results. Okay, 77% of you who work with a sponsor or CRO organization said your sites are somewhat prepared for an inspection. 17% answered very prepared, with 7 of you saying not prepared. So that concludes our final poll question. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, well, we'll get into some information regarding site preparedness, regarding the data that we found. But moving right now into some more detailed data, we asked the sites questions about study execution, and then the sites expressed satisfaction across all study execution attributes with sponsors, providing a score of 4.0 or higher. CROs received lower ratings for satisfaction for every study execution attribute asked. The attributes asked were quite comprehensive, noting some of the more difficult tasks to complete while running a study, like startup, closeout, and something that's near and dear to probably everyone on this webinar is setting realistic patient recruitment goals. I know it's near and dear to me, being a previous site coordinator and CRO project manager in my past lives. So those were the attributes that we were asking about. And then this slide shows the correlation between study execution attributes and NPS, that Net Promoter Score. As you can see from the highest correlation numbers, study closeout, communication, and inspection preparation support have the strongest correlation with NPS. Communication received the highest correlation with 0.83. I'm sure this doesn't surprise anyone, because we all know that communication is vital for just about every relationship. But this study gave us a lot of information on what communication means for working together on a study. We also asked qualitative data, and this qualitative data provided some details in what type of communication that the sites desire. Prompt communication, knowledge of the protocol and therapeutic area. This one made me nod my head up and down, and I'm sure most of you are as well. Also, being organized and prepared were some of the most important key qualities shared from the site. The site CRA is at the center of this vital communication, since they have the heavy burden of being the liaison between the site CRO combo, the sponsor CRO combo and the site. I think we all know that role comes with a big responsibility regarding communication. Next up for discussion is protocol design. All attributes of the study design assessed received satisfactory ratings. I think it's important to note on this slide, patient perspective and the ease of trial execution ranked the lowest. This is an important reminder to all of us who do not sit across the table from patients on a daily basis. Patients are the end user of the studies we design, so their perspective and the ease of trial execution are really important things to keep in mind when we're designing our studies. The next on, this is going to be the correlation slide. So this slide shows the correlation between protocol design and Net Promoter Score. And we can see actually something pretty interesting. The ease of trial execution showed the strongest correlation to NPS, even though we saw on the previous slide, it was actually the lowest satisfaction rating. This NPS correlation illustrates for us very nicely how important ease of trial execution is for the sites, right? If they can execute their trial easily, it impedes their satisfaction rating. More qualitative data, and this qualitative data regarding protocol design definitely speaks for itself and specifically calls out keeping the patient in mind, not metrics, which I think is something very important, and providing executable protocols with reasonable eligibility criteria. Everybody can go ahead and read some of the quotes we have here, but also not a surprise, but definitely worth mentioning, there's a few comments regarding protocol amendments. And I think we all probably agree sponsors and CROs don't do amendments just because they like to do amendments. But these comments, which suggest items to like not put the cart before the horse and to slow down and to consider the study design and what the study needs before issuing amendment after amendment after amendment, definitely speaks volumes regarding satisfaction. Then next up, this is the site's perception regarding study personnel. And these were questions specifically CRA attributes asked. The site satisfaction regarding study personnel were aligned across sponsors and CROs, but CROs receiving somewhat lower ratings. Basically, somewhat lower on every attribute asked, as you can kind of see from the ratings of the sponsors and the ratings of the CROs. Again, we asked many different attributes and seeing items like clarity of instruction being very important, and handling of CRA turnover and frequency of CRA turnover. I know that's often something discussed, were items that we asked here. And then here we see the correlation between study personnel attributes and Net Promoter Score. Communication is a very constant theme from this survey. Aspects on how sponsors and CROs communicate with site staff show the strongest correlation to NPS, with sponsor correlations at 0.72 and CRO correlations at 0.79. The ability to use your time efficiently scored the highest Net Promoter Score correlation for this question at 0.81 for the CRO correlation. This makes sense to me. I'm sure it makes sense to a lot of people because feeling as though your time is not utilized efficiently will certainly affect your satisfaction. And some more qualitative data for study personnel. This time it showed that the quality partners are very important. Sites that evaluated the sponsors noted the quality of the providers that had been selected by the sponsors, explaining organization, efficient communication, and the ability to make basic decisions were important to their satisfaction. Also, some respondents commented that they prefer to work directly with the sponsors. Back in the beginning of the presentation, Jim reviewed characteristics of the respondents, which provided the trial volume of each respondent. Other than noting that this group is a very hardworking group that took this survey, with the majority of the respondents working on 10 or more trials in the last 12 months, there's something interesting regarding trial volume, and it was shown that trial volume actually did not impact the perception of satisfaction. And then just to kind of go through and summarize some of the overall findings, the overall key findings, sites are looking for the same things in their sponsors and CROs. So it seems as though, you know, they think of them as a team and want the same things from the sponsors and the CROs. Again, I don't think any of this information will surprise anyone, but I'm sure it probably resonates with everyone because I think this is something that we all need and we all want. Sites specifically want effective communication and protocol design that has execution in mind. So not a protocol just, you know, written down on a piece of paper for instructions, but really thought on how you will execute the protocol and how easily a site can execute a protocol. And then of course, quality partners. I think we all realize that we're doing this together. whether you're a site, a CRO, or a sponsor, and that quality partners are definitely imperative to running a study successfully. So some of the conclusions here, and just regarding to become a sponsor or CRO of choice among the sites. So the respondents to the survey provided us information on becoming a sponsor or CRO of choice, and definitely showed that protocol quality and design should be a focus. Writing protocols with the ease of execution in mind. Ensure your staff and the staff of the providers you hire. So that means, any provider that a sponsor would hire, whether it be a CRO or any other provider, make sure that that group is trained and knowledgeable of the protocol, specifically the therapeutic area of the study. I think we're seeing that a lot more in terms of items that are very important, and that not all therapeutic areas are obviously created equal or the same. And then also, of course, practice good communication. I think this is, again, something we all really would like practiced as a whole, with the site, providing clear, concise, and timely communication. There was a lot of qualitative data providing that, a lot of times you just get an item that says noted or we'll get back to you soon, and then you don't actually receive a response. So those are just items of timely communication that are so important. And then last, of course, to provide support to the sites throughout the entire study, which includes startup, study closeout, and inspection preparation. There was a lot of information provided in the qualitative data and text that just mentioned, there was support through startup to get our metrics ready and to get our first patient in, but, kind of lost traction at closeout, and then, the sponsor CRO was basically absent when we were preparing for an inspection. So that kind of rolls back to the polling questions as well. So, most certainly to provide support the entire time to the site throughout the entire life cycle of the study is definitely imperative. So next up, Sarah, I'll hand it back over to you for any questions that we will have.
That sounds good. I'd like to thank you both very much for your insightful presentation. And as you said, Kristen, will now open the floor for any questions that are coming in from our audience members today. They can continue to send in their questions at this time. I've already received a few, so why don't we go ahead and get started with those. First question here from Avoca's experience. What do you see as best practice among sponsors and CROs preparing sites for inspections?
I'll go ahead, obviously, Jim, and take this one. I think from the Avoca side of things, inspection preparation is definitely a frame of mind and something that you have, the entire time when you're running your study, is keeping that top of mind of being inspection ready at all times. Obviously, having all of your TMF ready and all of the documents in your TMF and just preparing and knowing all of the items that you'd be needing, relying with your sponsor to get all the information, using any tools that you might have for inspection readiness, keeping in mind with E6R2 and the changes in the guidelines with that is all items to really be ready for an inspection.
That's great. Okay, thanks very much for that response. Our next question, what are some practical tools or techniques that sponsors and CROs use to improve working relationships with sites?
I could comment on that. One of the things that we've seen a lot of in the last several years have been sponsors building preferred relationships with sites. And by that, I mean, communicating at various levels. In other words, talking to the PI, talking to the coordinator throughout the various members of the study team. One of the things that I think is exciting that's been happening and probably needs to happen more frequently is the idea of taking a rough draft of a protocol and actually sitting down with the people who execute the protocol and getting their input on some of the things that actually are defined in the study here. Things like, are the eligibility criteria clear? Are they realistic? Is the enrollment timeline realistic? What about the study visits? How will patients respond to that? Are there other logistical questions within the design of the protocol that are going to create particular problems either for the site or for the patient participating in the study? So I think just the overall enhancement of communication at the early stages has been, or could be, very important, has been very important to some extent, but it probably needs to be assimilated more into the overall enterprise than it has been to date.
Jim, I'm going to add some color to that. I completely agree. Again, putting my old hat on as a site coordinator, I think that's a great practice to start. I remember getting protocols that have been signed, sealed, delivered, getting to the coordinator and realizing that it's actually impossible to get the blood draws to where they need to be facilitated within the hospital. It was actually impossible. Or having ECOG scores that just didn't even match the therapeutic area or the disease, right? You have a very end-stage disease and you need an ECOG of 0 or 1. So items of that nature just, I think, could be nipped in the bud. Again, would eliminate multiple protocol amendments later when you're facilitating the study. If you have the people that are doing the work kind of look at it and take view of it as a functional role.
Yep, I totally agree. And it's interesting that, one of the top qualities is this question of communication. Now, of course, I'm sure that's relevant throughout the entire course of the study or of the trial. But again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of trouble, as they say. And that's an area where, as an industry, I think we could do a much better job of having communication between sites and the sponsors / CROs prior to the study beginning.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, that's great. Thank you both for weighing in on that question. Our next attendee here writes, the communication aspect of these results should be of no surprise. However, it is often something discussed at the study level. So how do we effectively communicate information in a timely manner without overburdening sites? Part of this is a result of the numerous people needing to communicate with the site, so including sponsor, CROs, CRAs, clinical recruitment suppliers, equipment and lab suppliers, etc. So their question is, did this survey help provide some thoughts on how to best approach this?
That is a great question. I'll give you, Kristen, you can weigh in. I'll give my opinion. I don't think this survey really addressed that. I think we were just really trying to get a sense of what are some of the key drivers. And I think what you're pointing to here is indeed one of the problems around communication, which is there are so many touch points coming into the site. I mean, what you just described was for one study. And if you think about that these sites are doing 10 or more studies in many cases, it just grows exponentially in terms of the amount of communication that's required. Now, that being said, one of the things that we're doing to try to find solutions to this is the ACRP Avoca Quality Congress. So when we sat down last year or last spring, those are the kinds of topics that come up. And I don't have any specific solutions that I can point to today, but those are the kinds of things that I feel are problems that could be solved with the right people in the room.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. Yes, especially on lessons learned that some sites, can provide context on what does work for them. I mean, I know just from past lives and now on the other side of things, being a project manager, that communication plan is most certainly vital. Seems sometimes silly that we have to have a plan to tell us how to communicate within the study, but really thinking that out and having the different pathways of communication and who those pathways are. Pathways to the sponsor, from the site to the sponsor, from the sponsor to the CRO, CRO to the site back. I think all of that, having all those different permutations worked out in your communication plan also definitely helps the study regarding the communication issue.
All right, great. Another question here about that survey. Did the survey ask about the importance of study support tools to help implement the protocol?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Kristen?
I don't think it asked specifically about support tools in terms of what what the sites use or needs specified. It was most certainly just more of what, larger attributes regarding that nature. So I don't think that there was very specific tools. And Sarah, I don't know if you can confirm, did the sites provide information on what type of support tools they need from sponsors and CROs?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. This person's just asking if the survey addressed at all the importance of those study support tools to help implement the protocol. So they don't specify sites or sponsors or anyone in there.
Got you. I mean, in some of the qualitative data, just support regarding communication was noted, but I don't think anybody said, oh, this tool, is very imperative to working well, and helping communication. But we could follow up offline as well.
I mean, I can add one note. If what we're talking about are technology tools, I don't think that was addressed in this survey, but we have had other surveys conducted, and one of the findings was that sites are pretty much overwhelmed with the number of technology tools. And again, it comes back to the same issue that I mentioned earlier. If you're doing 10 different studies and you have 10 different data capture tools, for example, it gets pretty confusing when you start adding up all those different tools that are used on one study, and then you multiply that by the number of studies that are all occurring at the same time. So I have had conversations with sites and seen surveys that talk about the concerns that they have of just keeping up with all the technology coming at them so rapidly. And oddly enough, the number one most common complaint was trying to keep up with all the logon IDs and passwords. So it's simple little things like that that sometimes can create challenges and roadblocks at the site level.
Interesting. Okay, that's good. Good to know. Thank you both for addressing that question. Our next question here, I think you've touched on this a little, but what can be done to help sites improve their performance?
I can give you my particular perspective on that. One is to follow on the last point is I think eventually the industry will consolidate some of the technology tools. I mean, if you look at e-data capture, when that was first introduced, there were quite a number of vendors, and now we're down to just a handful. And people are becoming used to using and proficient at using those various tools. So they understand it because they have experience with them. So that's one thing from a technology perspective. I think the other thing, and this is one of our mantras here at ACRP, is we've got to continually improve the quality of the individuals conducting the research. For those of you that are not at a site, it's very interesting to learn that the FDA guidelines around qualified personnel are pretty vague. And quite frankly, it's not difficult to become a study coordinator. There's no real background requirement in terms of education or training and development. And consequently, there's a wide variance in terms of the quality of the performance at sites, particularly amongst the CRC ranks. And I'm not disparaging CRCs. I'm just saying that as an industry, we should become more concerned or more thoughtful about how we bring people into that role. What kind of educational background should they have? What kind of training should they have? How do we have a career path for them? All the things related to most professions don't exist really today. And so that's one of our major concerns, and we feel an opportunity in the industry to really drive higher quality by reducing the variance in the performance of the individuals at the site level. Now, that being said, that also applies to coordinators. To monitors. We know that there is a high variance in the quality of monitors that are interfacing with sites. So, those very important roles really need more definition and standardization in order for us to reduce the variance and then in turn reduce the amount of issues that we're seeing with quality in clinical studies.
I'm just going to weigh into, just with being a previous coordinator for quite a few years, I definitely think something that, and this is going to sound a little obscure, but something that can definitely help the site's performance is setting the sites up for success, right? And that burden comes on to the sponsors and CROs, and just having a well thought out protocol, right? Having something that the sites can easily execute. Because remember, they're doing your study, and essentially half of them are doing 9 other studies at the same time. So just setting them up for ease of execution of the trial, I think that spoke volumes with me from this research, and definitely hit home near and dear to me, wearing the white coat before and consenting patients and doing studies. Also, I think a huge part of it is definitely just making sure that you invest in the coordinators doing your study. Something I've seen work actually really well is there's a joke that you have an investigator meeting, but who does the majority of your work through this, throughout the study? It's the coordinator. Why isn't there coordinator specific meetings? And I've actually have done those, and I thought that they went over really well. Coordinators have very, very specific questions to their facility, and to be able to think about them and answer them and, conduct those types of protocol trainings one-on-one with a coordinator are really wonderful opportunities. So I think just those items really set up a site and set up coordinators for success.
So vice versa then, what tools do sites use to improve how they work with sponsors and CROs?
Well, that's a great question. I think it really kind of depends on the sites. Again, some are very, very good at, their organizational skills, their staffing, all the things that are required to run a really strong, efficient business. And, I think that there's probably, again, more opportunity there because there are some sites that are very good at that, and there are others that are not so good. And so we could probably work as an industry to develop some standard tools that would be more, that could be used across the industry and not just at the high-performing sites. Kristen, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I kind of agree with just the business makeup of the facility. I think organization's key, having those items where whatever you're using internally as a tracker is essentially the same throughout the different sections of your study, or sections of your site. Meaning, if you're doing an oncology study and it's a solid tumor study, then using the same trackers within the lung cancer group, within the breast cancer group, within, using just the same tools inside having standardization of the tools inside the site is huge. Also, just having organization. I've seen sites that, they don't know who's covering for the person and they're going on a, 3-week vacation, just having those facilitation organization items are huge too. That way helps the CRO and the sponsor have confidence in the site when they're organized, especially just with their personnel, knowing that their study is not gonna, go overlooked at that time.
Okay, our next question here then, what skills are CRAs being trained on to improve communication with sites?
That's a good one.
That is a good one. Well, I can give you a little bit of framework. So there was some work done back in 2014 out of MRCT Harvard with an organization they called the Joint Task Force. And this was a group of stakeholders from academia, from sites, from not-for-profits like ACRP, sponsors, CROs, you name it, government, regulatory. And they came up with a framework of what they called the 8 competency domains. Now, 2 of the domains within those 8 are what we consider soft skills. So one was around leadership and one was around communication skills. And it's what we've done at ACRP is we've taken those skills and then drilled them down to, again, using a cross-stakeholder group, drilling them down into specifics for a specific role. We've done it for CRAs and we've done it for study coordinators. We're in the process as we speak for doing it for PIs. And quite frankly, the soft skills part of it has been quite challenging, including communication. So there are things, I believe, out there, but there aren't many right now that actually focus on those type of skill sets as opposed to the more concrete things about how you do the job. So more to come on that, but it's an area that we're looking into currently and plan to expand on over the next year or so.
Well, that's great. I'd like to thank you both very much for all of those answers. We've now reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If any of our attendees would like more information, they can visit the websites that are now showing on their screens. So there's the avocagroup.com and acrpnet.org. And you can also visit the avocagroup.com/news-events for more upcoming webinars and conferences. And you can also share this webinar on LinkedIn by clicking the link I've sent to all participants through that questions chat box. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's conference. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now please join us in thanking our speakers for today, Kristen Bennett and Jim Cremidas. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.